If it was crazy, when did you find out? Woke one was crazy. The words exploded across the hearing room screen before anyone had finished settling into their chairs. JD Vance stared across the table at AOC. Your side said it. Now I want the date. AOC narrowed her eyes. The date of what? The exact day the moral emergency became embarrassing. A ripple moved through the gallery. Kamala Harris leaned toward her microphone. Senator, this hearing is supposed to be about whether Americans can afford groceries and housing. It is. Then perhaps we should discuss groceries and housing. We will. JD tapped the folder in front of him. Right after we establish whether the people offering America a new economic message actually believe the things they say, AOC leaned forward. Politics changes. People learn. Movements learn. Governments learn. If your accusation is that I don't repeat every political sentence from 5 years ago, congratulations. You've discovered adulthood. A few laughs broke from the back row. JD nodded. Good. AOC paused. Good? Absolutely. Then show me what changed. The laughs vanished. AOC stared at him. JD continued. Did the evidence change? Did the principle change? Or did the polling change? Kamala cut in. That's a false choice. Then give me the fourth choice. Judgment. That's not an answer. It's exactly an answer. Kamala straightened. Consistency means never changing. Integrity means changing when reality tells you you're wrong. That one landed. AOC looked toward Kamala. JD let the silence breathe. Then he nodded again. That's a very good defense. Kamala almost smiled. Thank you. Now prove it. The smile disappeared. Show me the reality that changed. Show me the evidence. Show me the consequence. Show me something other than an election calendar. AOC shook her head. You've already decided what answer you want. No, I've decided vague answers don't count. The country experienced consequences. Which consequences? Public safety. Which policy? Economic pressure. Which policy? Social division. Which policy? AOC's jaw tightened. You know exactly what I'm talking about. No, I know exactly what Washington does when it wants credit for changing without paying the bill for being wrong. Kamala leaned in. You're treating political evolution like a confession. No, I'm treating selective amnesia like a credibility problem. AOC raised one hand. Nobody forgot anything? Perfect. JD clicked the remote. The screen changed. Old rhetoric appeared beside newer rhetoric. No screaming montage. No dramatic narrator. Just then and now, JD pointed toward it. You can say you changed. You can say the country changed. You can say new evidence changed you. But you don't get to pretend there was never a bridge between those two positions. AOC gave him a cold smile. And while you're building your bridge metaphor, people are wondering whether they can pay rent. JD stopped. AOC saw the opening. She took it. A mother standing in a grocery aisle tonight does not care whether JD Vance won a debate about a phrase somebody used 5 years ago. She cares about the number at the bottom of the receipt. A 30-year-old with a full-time job does not care whether you got applause in a hearing room. He cares whether he will ever own a home. A family doesn't care about your ideological labels when the paycheck disappears before the month does. That is affordability. That is the hearing. And that is what you're avoiding. The room went quiet. For the first time, JD looked like he might have walked directly into AOC's trap. Kamala leaned back. She's right. JD turned toward her. If this is an affordability hearing, then let's talk about affordability. Let's talk about why Americans feel like ordinary life has become a luxury product. Let's talk about housing. Let's talk about food. Let's talk about gas. Let's talk about what people actually pay. JD looked back at AOC. You're right. AOC blinked. Excuse me? You're right. People don't buy groceries with ideology. They don't make rent with a speech about capitalism. They don't make a mortgage payment with a lecture about socialism. AOC gave a small shrug. Then maybe we're finally getting somewhere. We are. JD clicked the remote again. The political statements disappeared. A grocery receipt filled the screen. Milk. eggs, meat, produce, household basics. One long column of ordinary purchases. JD pointed toward it. This is the battlefield, not Twitter, not cable news, not some college seminar. This, AOC nodded. Finally, so let's talk about it. We are. No, you're still trying to turn my old positions into the story. JD looked at her. I'm trying to understand why your story works. AOC frowned. What does that mean? It means you didn't invent this political weapon. What weapon? Affordability. Kamala's eyes shifted toward him. JD pressed the remote. The receipt vanished. The screen went dark. Then a photograph appeared. A packed Bernie Sanders rally. Young voters pressed shoulder to shoulder. Campaign signs in the air. The year underneath it was simple. Lanson Lenisher Luke. JD looked across the room. 10 years ago, Bernie Sanders figured out something Republicans laughed at and Democrats feared. AOC leaned toward her microphone. You're going to explain Bernie Sanders to me? No, I'm going to explain Bernie Sanders to Republicans. That changed the room. JD pointed toward the photograph. Those people weren't filling rallies because they all spent their weekends reading Marx. They were there because rent hurt. Healthcare hurt. Groceries hurt. Housing felt impossible. They believed the system had stopped working for people like them. AOC immediately jumped in. Exactly. JD turned toward her. Exactly. AOC smiled. You're making my argument. No. I'm separating your diagnosis from your prescription. Her smile faded. Bernie understood the anger. JD Pausen. That doesn't mean Bernie understood the cure. AOC leaned closer. You think he was wrong? I think he understood something important. What? That when ordinary life becomes unaffordable, radical ideas stop sounding radical. The gallery fell silent again. Kamala watched him. JD continued. And Republicans who think they can laugh that away are fools. AOC almost looked impressed. Careful, your own side might hear you. They should. Because mocking an opponent is not the same thing as defeating the reason people listen to them. Kamala interrupted. Bernie Sanders lost. JD turned. Did the ideal lose? The voters chose somebody else. That's how elections work. And political movements don't disappear because one candidate loses. Kamala folded her hands. He did not win the nomination. I didn't say he did. Then what exactly are you claiming? JD clicked the remote. The rally disappeared. Two numbers filled the screen. 13,5 millions. 43%. AOC stared at them. Kamala did not speak. JD let the numbers sit there. Those are the numbers cited for Bernie Sanders in the 2016 Democratic primary. 13.5 million votes. Roughly 43%. Kamala finally answered. And he still lost. Yes. JD nodded. He lost. Now answer the question you keep avoiding. What question? Does that look like a fringe movement? Kamala's expression tightened. A primary result does not prove that an entire party embraced socialism. I didn't say it did. Then don't imply it. I'm implying something much more dangerous. AOC leaned forward. Which is? JD looked directly at her. That Bernie Sanders proved economic anger could mobilize millions. And now somebody younger has learned how to carry the same argument without looking like Bernie Sanders. AOC's eyes narrowed. Say my name. I don't need to. Say it. JD didn't blink. You. The hearing room snapped silent. AOC sat back. So now I'm dangerous? Politically? Yes, because you understand the grievance. You understand the audience. And you understand something. Too many Republicans still don't. AOC stared at him. JD pointed toward the black screen behind him. People don't become interested in left-wing populism because somebody gives them a communist manifesto. They become interested when the rent is due. They become interested when the grocery bill keeps climbing. They become interested when a house feels permanently out of reach. AOC gave him a thin smile. You're getting closer. To what? To admitting we're right? JD shook his head. No, I'm admitting you found the wound. Part 2 is where we find out whether your medicine heals it. Kamala leaned toward the microphone. You keep returning to Bernie Sanders because Bernie Sanders lost. JD looked at her. Yes, Bernie lost. Then he pointed back toward the numbers. 13.5 million. 43%. His voice dropped. But tell me something. If Bernie lost, why is his argument still sitting at this table? AOC's smile vanished. The screen went black. You called it an insurgency until you needed its voters. Bernie lost. Kamala Harris did not look at JD Vance when she said it. She looked at the numbers still glowing behind him. 13,5 millions. 43%. JD leaned toward the microphone. Then why didn't the argument lose with him? AOC answered before Kamala could. Because the argument was real. JD turned toward her. Good? AOC paused. Good? Very good. Then let's stop pretending this is mysterious. I'm not pretending. Bernie talked about wages. He talked about health care. He talked about housing. He talked about people working full time and still feeling like they're falling behind. He talked about corporate power. He talked about an economy that people could see growing on television while their own lives felt smaller. JD nodded. Exactly. Kamala Katin. You're agreeing with her again. I agree with facts when they're facts. AOC leaned forward. Then say it clearly. Say what? Say Bernie Sanders was right. JD looked at her for a long second. Bernie Sanders was right about the anger. The hearing room went still. AOC's expression changed. Not victory, recognition. JD continued. He understood that people who cannot afford ordinary life don't care how beautifully Washington explains the economy. He understood that a young couple doesn't need a lecture about GDP when they're getting outbid on a house again. He understood that a worker doesn't care about ideological branding when the grocery cart feels more expensive every month. AOC nodded. And diagnosing the disease does not make you the doctor. There it was. AOC's eyes hardened. You couldn't let yourself agree for 10 seconds. I agreed with the diagnosis. I'm asking you to defend the prescription. You mean healthcare? I mean all of it. You mean taxing billionaires? I mean all of it. You mean stronger labor protections? All of it. You mean housing policy? All of it. AOC leaned closer. Then stop hiding behind the word socialism and debate the policies. JD shook his head. I'm not hiding behind the word. I'm asking what happens after the applause. Kamala smiled faintly. That's convenient. What is? You've taken every grievance that helped Bernie and decided those grievances are legitimate. But every solution that came from his side is suddenly dangerous. JD looked at her. That's called distinguishing a problem from a solution. No, that's called wanting the political benefit of acknowledging pain without accepting any obligation to fix it. JD pointed toward her. That's a strong argument. AOC glanced toward Kamala. JD continued, and now we'll test it. The screen behind them changed. A photograph from 2016 appeared. Another packed Sanders rally. Young voters, homemade signs. A room built for sports filled with political energy. JD looked toward AOC. Why were they there? You already answered that. I want you to answer it. Because people wanted change. Too vague. Because they were tired of an economy that worked better for people at the top. Better because healthcare was too expensive. Keep going. Because housing was becoming unaffordable. Keep going. Because wages weren't matching the cost of living. JD nodded. Now we're getting somewhere. AOC gave him a cold look. You're enjoying this way too much. No. I'm making sure nobody in my party makes the mistake of thinking these people were hypnotized by a word. They weren't. They were angry. Kamala moved toward her microphone. Anger isn't an ideology. Correct. It isn't a governing philosophy. Correct. And it doesn't prove that the Democratic Party became socialist. JD turned toward her. I haven't said that. You keep implying it. I'm saying something simpler. What? Your establishment underestimated the political value of the anger. Kamala's expression tightened. The Democratic Party had a primary. Yes. Voters chose. Yes. Bernie Sanders did not win. Yes. So stop rewriting history as some stolen insurgency. JD raised one hand. I'm not making the sources more speculative claims. I'm making a political observation. Was the Democratic establishment comfortable with Bernie Sanders? Kamala paused. Political parties contain factions. That wasn't the question. It is the answer. No. It's an escape hatch. AOC leaned in. The establishment underestimated him. Kamala turned slightly toward her. AOC kept going. It underestimated how angry younger voters were. It underestimated how many people were tired of hearing that everything was fine. It underestimated how much appetite there was for a candidate willing to say the system itself needed structural change. JD said nothing. He didn't need to. Kamala looked toward AOC. The Democratic Party represents more than one faction. I know. It represents moderates. I know. Labor. I know. Minority communities. I know. Suburban voters. I know. Progressives don't get to declare themselves the entire coalition. AOC's voice sharpened. I didn't. JD finally spoke. No. You just said the coalition underestimated your movement. Silence. Kamala looked at him. JD leaned back. Interesting problem. AOC frowned. What problem? 10 years ago, Bernie was the insurgent. Now, his language is everywhere. Kamala shook her head. That is an enormous overstatement. Then let's narrow it. JD clicked the remote. The rally image disappeared. The words affordability, corporate power, housing, healthcare, working people filled the screen. JD looked toward AOC. Does any of this sound politically dead to you? No. Does any of it sound fringe? No. Does any of it sound like something the Democratic Party can ignore? AOC smiled. No. JD nodded. Thank you. Kamala jumped in. Those issues are not owned by Bernie Sanders. Correct? They are not owned by Democratic socialists. Correct. And they are not proof of socialism. Correct. Kamala stared at him. Then what exactly are you trying to prove? JD pointed toward AOC. That she learned how to carry the energy without carrying every piece of the baggage. AOC's smile disappeared. Say that again. You're younger. You speak the language of the generation that feels locked out. You know where Bernie's message worked. You also know where the old progressive brand scared people. And you're adapting. AOC gave a dry laugh. So now I'm some kind of political science project? No. You're a serious politician. That landed harder than an insult would have. AOC tilted her head. Careful. Your friends might hear you. They should. JD looked toward the Republican side of the room. Republicans spent years collecting clips of you. They collected jokes. They collected memes. They collected moments they thought made you look ridiculous. AOC leaned back. And while they were laughing, you were learning what worked. Kamala watched silently. JD continued. That is politically smart. AOC raised an eyebrow. Politically smart? Yes. You want me to put that in an ad? If you do, include the next sentence. What next sentence? Being politically smart doesn't make the policy right. AOC smiled. There he is. JD smiled back. There I am. AOC leaned closer. Then let's stop talking about branding. Gladly. Let's talk about power. Go ahead. People are tired of billionaires writing the rules. JD said nothing. They are tired of companies getting bigger while their own bargaining power gets smaller. They are tired of being told that concentration of wealth at the top is somehow the natural order. They are tired of an economy where a handful of people can buy access most families will never have. JD clicked the remote. The screen changed again. Photographs from the Sanders AOC Fight the Oligarchy tour filled it. JD looked toward her. There it is. AOC glanced at the screen. There what is? The word. What word? Oligarchy. AOC shrugged. If the shoe fits. It's powerful because it's true. It's powerful because it's broad. Kamala leaned toward her microphone. Corporate concentration is a legitimate concern. JD nodded. I agree. AOC laughed. This hearing is becoming very confusing for your side. No, it's becoming very uncomfortable for yours. How? Because I'm not going to make the easy argument. AOC gestured toward the screen. Which easy argument? The travel? AOC's eyes narrowed. JD continued. The source commentary points to the expensive aviation associated with that tour and uses it as an hypocrisy shot. Go ahead. You clearly want to. No. AOC blinked. No. Transportation logistics are not an economic philosophy. AOC sought back. Finally, which is why I'm not going to pretend a plane answers the policy question. Kamala looked almost surprised. JD clicked the screen off. The real question comes after the cameras leave. AOC folded her arms, then asked it, does the policy make life cheaper? Which policy? Pick one. Housing. Fine. Healthcare. Fine. Wages. Fine. Labor. Fine. AOC leaned toward the microphone. Then here's my question. JD waited. Why can a young person work full-time and still feel like home ownership is fictional? No answer. Why can a family do everything right and still be one medical emergency away from panic? JD watched her. Why does a raise disappear into rent? Kamala leaned forward. Why does economic growth so often feel like a statistic instead of a lived improvement? AOC looked straight at JD. You keep telling people the cure we're offering is dangerous. Fine. What's yours? The hearing room changed. The prosecutor's chair had just become the witness chair. JD looked down at his notes. AOC did not let him escape. You spent this entire hearing asking what changed. I'm asking you now, what changes for the family? What changes for the renter? What changes for the worker? What changes for the couple who wants a house? What do you actually do? Kamala joined her. That is the question this hearing has avoided. JD looked toward Kamala. No, that is the question you have postponed. AOC pressed. You told us diagnosis isn't enough. Correct. You said identifying pain doesn't give us ownership of the cure. Correct. Then prescribe something. The gallery was completely silent. No laughter now. No murmurs? JD looked toward the blank screen. A few minutes earlier, it had held Bernie Sanders. Then AOC. Then the words, fight the oligarchy. Now there was nothing. AOC leaned toward the microphone one final time. You've had plenty of time to explain why we're wrong. Tell the family watching from a kitchen table what you're offering instead. JD raised his eyes. That's fair. AOC waited. Kamala waited. JD placed both hands flat on the desk. Then let's talk about results. The screen behind him came alive. Not with Bernie. Not with AOC. Not with Kamala. 3 ordinary words appeared. Groceries. Rent. Home. JD looked across the table. You wanted my answer. AOC nodded. I do. Good. Then part 3 starts here. You identified the pain. That doesn't mean you own the cure. Results. JD Vance did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The 3 words behind him had already done the work. Groceries. Rent. Home. AOC leaned toward the microphone. Results is not a policy. No, it's the standard. Kamala Harris folded her hands. Then apply it to yourself. I intend to. AOC smiled. Good, because you've spent 2 parts of this hearing explaining what everybody else got wrong. Now explain what your side got right. JD nodded. Fair? Republicans have failed working people before. A few heads turned. Kamala looked almost amused. Interesting admission. It shouldn't be. A political party that refuses to diagnose its own failures deserves to lose. AOC jumped in. So Republicans never protected corporations? I didn't say that. Never protected monopolies? I didn't say that. Never defended policies that made life harder for working families? I didn't say that either. Then what exactly are you defending? JD pointed toward the screen. The principle that the cure has to work. AOC shook her head. That's convenient. No. Convenient is identifying pain and pretending the diagnosis automatically validates every prescription that follows. AOC leaned closer. People are hurting. Agreed. Rent is too high. Agreed. Home ownership is out of reach for too many young people. Agreed. Healthcare can crush a family. Agreed. Then why do you keep fighting the people trying to fix it? JD looked directly at her. Because agreeing that the house is on fire does not mean I have to let you choose the fire extinguisher. The room reacted. AOC did not. Then prove yours works. That's exactly where we're going. Kamala cut in. Senator, markets do not solve every problem. Agreed. AOC blinked. There you go again. What? Agreeing with us. JD smiled faintly. Disagreement is not a substitute for thinking. Kamala's expression hardened. JD continued. The question is not whether government has a role. The question is where government lowers costs and where government simply moves the bill. Where it creates supply, where it creates dependency, where it removes a barrier, where it adds 10 more. AOC lifted one hand. Housing. JD looked at her. Let's do one issue. Housing. Fine. Young people cannot afford homes. True. Renters are drowning. Many are. Developers chase luxury projects while working families get pushed farther out. Sometimes zoning, financing, wages, land costs, interest rates, construction costs, local rules, federal rules. JD tapped the table. Exactly. AOC paused. Exactly? Exactly. Because housing is not a slogan. It's a system. And every politician who says one magic federal program fixes it is selling something. AOC frowned. Nobody said one program fixes everything. Good. Then we're narrowing the disagreement. Kamala leaned forward. Government can increase supply. Yes. It can support first-time buyers. Yes. It can regulate abusive practices. Yes. AOC looked almost irritated. Then what is the fight? JD turned toward her. The fight is over whether your answer stops at spending more money. AOC's eyes narrowed. It doesn't. Then show the chain. What chain? Police, cost, incentive, supply, outcome. Show me what happens after the press conference. AOC leaned back. You love that line. Because Washington loves the press conference. Kamala interrupted. You are reducing complex policy to theater. No, I'm separating theater from policy. AOC's voice sharpened. Fine, let's separate them. Do you believe healthcare should be affordable? Yes. Do you believe workers should be paid enough to live? Yes. Do you believe families should be able to buy homes? Yes. Do you believe billionaires have too much political influence? Often, AOC stared at him, and yet you want the audience to think we're the radicals. JD shook his head. No. I want the audience to notice that goals are not the same thing as mechanisms. Everybody wants affordable housing. Everybody wants cheaper food. Everybody wants higher real wages. The fight begins when we ask what your policy actually does. Kamala leaned toward the microphone. That sounds reasonable because you are stating the obvious. Good. Then let's make it the rule. What rule? No policy gets credit for its intention, only for its result. The room went quiet again. AOC stared at him. That's your big revelation? No. It's the standard politicians hate because it leaves nowhere to hide. JD pressed the remote. The 3 words disappeared. The opening phrase returned. Woke one was crazy. Kamala glanced at the screen. We are back to this? No. We finally reached what it means. AOC folded her arms. Go ahead. JD looked at her. I do not care that politicians change. I care whether they account for the change. If the policy was wrong, say it was wrong. If the policy was right, defend it. If the circumstances changed, show us the circumstances. If the evidence changed, show us the evidence. But don't spend years telling Americans something is a moral emergency and then laugh it away when it becomes inconvenient. AOC leaned in. You're still looking for a confession. No, I'm looking for a standard. Kamala answered before JD could continue. People can learn without performing public penance for you. Absolutely. So what is this really about? Trust. Kamala gave him a skeptical look. JD pointed at the screen. If yesterday's emergency becomes today's joke, voters are allowed to ask whether tomorrow's emergency is real. That landed. AOC looked away for half a second. Then she came back harder. You know what voters are also allowed to ask? What? Why they should trust your side. Ask it. Why should a 30-year-old renter trust you? Why should a couple trying to buy their first home trust you? Why should a worker looking at a grocery bill trust you? You've got a great critique. Where is the delivery? JD nodded. That's the right question. AOC stared at him. Then answer it. By making affordability measurable. That's still rhetoric. Then measure it. Cost of food, cost of housing, real wages, énergie, interest burden, business formation, construction, not applause, note hashtags, not moral language, outcomes. Kamala shook her head. Government does not control every outcome. JD turned immediately. Exactly. Kamala paused. JD continued. Then government should stop promising what it cannot guarantee. AOC jumped in, and corporations should stop pretending they have no power either. Agreed. And landlords, market power matters. And insurers, market power matters. And pharmaceutical companies, market power matters. AOC gave him a long look. You are making it very difficult to caricature you today. That's because caricatures are for people who don't have arguments. A few people in the room laughed. Kamala did not. She shifted the ground. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez does not define the Democratic Party. JD looked toward her. I never said she did. Then stopped talking about her as if she represents every Democrat. She doesn't. AOC looked toward JD. Then what exactly am I supposed to represent? JD answered without hesitation. The direction of the pressure. Kamala frowned. What does that mean? 10 years ago, Bernie Sanders was pressure from outside the establishment. Now the language that powered that insurgency is inside the coalition. Kamala shook her head. That does not make the coalition socialist. I didn't say it did. You keep pushing toward that conclusion. I'm pushing toward a different one, which is your party learned that economic populism is useful. Or maybe voters changed the party. JD pointed toward her. Exactly. Kamala turned slightly toward AOC. AOC noticed. JD noticed too. He did not interrupt. AOC leaned toward the microphone. You keep talking about me like I'm a vehicle. Then stop letting people talk about you like a brand. How? Tell me what you would keep, even if it cost you votes. AOC stared at him. Workers deserve bargaining power. That's a principle. Housing should not be a luxury. That's a goal. Healthcare should not bankrupt a family. Goal. Extreme concentration of wealth distorts democracy. Argument. AOC's voice tightened. What exactly do you want? Specificity. No. You want a clip. Then don't give me one. That stopped her. JD continued. Tell us the policy you would defend even if the focus group hated it. Tell us the cost. Tell us the trade-off. Tell us who pays. Tell us what happens if it fails. That's governing. AOC looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled without humor. A 30-year-old who cannot afford a home does not care which one of us wins this exchange. JD said nothing. That person cares whether next year is easier than this year. Whether rent takes less of the paycheck, whether groceries stop swallowing the raise, whether the future feels closer instead of farther away. JD nodded. That may be the smartest thing said in this hearing. AOC blinked. Then act like it. I intend to. He pressed the remote. The screen changed one final time. 2 words. Who delivered? AOC stared at them. Kamala stared too. JD leaned toward the microphone. You just gave us the standard. Next year, easier than this year. Not intention, not slogan, not labels, outcomes. Kamala immediately answered. No administration can guarantee that every American will be better off every single year. Correct. Then your standard is impossible. No, my standard is accountability. JD pointed toward the screen. If you promise lower costs and costs rise, explain why. If you promise more housing and supply does not increase, explain why. If you promise workers more power and their real lives do not improve, explain why. If Republicans promise prosperity and fail, hold us to the same standard. AOC leaned closer. The same standard? The same. Not a special standard for Democrats? No. Not a special standard for progressives? No. Not a special standard for MAGA? No. JD looked around the hearing room. Some question? Who delivered? The room was quiet enough to hear a camera shutter. Kamala broke the silence. So, this entire hearing ends with an election slogan. JD looked at her. No. It ends with the question every election eventually becomes. Can you make my life better? AOC shook her head slowly. And you think MAGA owns that question? No. That answer surprised both women. JD continued. Nobody owns it. That's the mistake political movements make right before they lose. They think the voters belong to them. They don't. They think anger belongs to them. It doesn't. They think working people belong to them. They don't. They have to earn them. AOC leaned back. For once, we agree. JD allowed himself a small smile. Don't get comfortable. A few laughs broke through the tension. Then JD turned toward the Republican side of the room. His tone changed. If the right looks at a family struggling with groceries and answers with a lecture, the right deserves to lose that family. AOC's expression shifted. If conservatives look at housing costs and tell young people their frustration is imaginary, conservatives deserve the political consequences. Kamala watched him carefully. If Republicans think saying socialism loudly enough will make rent cheaper, they're kidding themselves. AOC nodded once. JD turned back toward her. But the reverse is also true. Identifying the pain does not give you ownership of the cure. AOC leaned forward. And you think your cure is better. I think it has to prove itself. Just like yours. Kamala glanced toward the screen. Who delivered? JD nodded. That's the ball game. AOC looked at him. Then let voters answer. They will. Kamala leaned toward her microphone. And I assume you already know what they'll say. JD shook his head. No. Kamala paused. No? That's another mistake politicians make. They think they already know the answer. He looked at the two words on the screen. I think voters know the question. The room fell silent for the last time. JD looked across the table. People do not become open to radical answers because somebody hands them a textbook. They become open to radical answers when ordinary life stops feeling ordinary. When rent feels permanent. When home ownership feels fictional. When groceries turn into a weekly reminder that something is wrong. So no, I'm not laughing at the anger. I'm taking it seriously. AOC watched him without interrupting. So should Republicans. So should Democrats. So should anybody who thinks they deserve to govern. JD closed the folder in front of him. You do not defeat socialism by pretending people are not hurting. You defeat it by proving freedom can deliver better. He looked once more at the screen. Who delivered? That's the argument. That's the standard. And sooner or later, that's the vote. The screen went black, cut to silence.